Welcome to Burbank Public Library's Genealogy tutorial, a guide to help beginners start their journey into family history research. So, what interested you in this webinar? What are you hoping to learn? You should always ask yourself why you want to go down this road. Many people want to trace their ancestry. Some want to connect with family members and possibly even find family members they've never met. Some want to determine their ethnic origins or trace congenital health problems. I do it to create a legacy for my children and my future descendants. I also do it because I have a passion for family history. Each family has a rich story, but it often falls to one person in a generation to document and preserve it. Once you know why you want to discover, ask yourself who you know best. Yes, yourself. Most people typically know their birth date, names of their parents, and where they are from. Are there family members who can help you with your search? What resources do you already have, and what do you want to find? What ways are you most comfortable researching? Do you have general knowledge of computers, or would you rather do more traditional research? After you have collected your documents and artifacts, what are best practices to keep them organized and safe? These are all topics we'll cover right now. We always start with ourselves and move backward. Gather together your own documents. These can include birth certificates, marriage licenses, passports, religious records, military records, school records, photographs, and as you can see, the list is extensive. I suggest you then move to your parents and gather their records. Other records to consider as potentially informative include employment records, land records, newspaper clippings, family Bibles, immigration and naturalization papers, and death certificates. Did you know that many of these vital documents can hold answers to questions you might have? If you look at this birth certificate, you can see the full name of the individual, their mother's maiden name, their parents' occupations, their address at the time of birth, along with various information to help you get a better understanding of their lives at that moment in history. Death certificates are full of information tidbits as well. They have the day and time of death, the cause of death, and typically they indicate where the body is to be buried or interred. These often have the name and birthplace of the deceased parents and the name, address, and occupation of the spouse. It will also indicate who the informant was of the death, if someone other than the spouse. Here are some examples of documents I found regarding my own grandfather. The United States started collecting birth data in 1902, but birth certificates did not become compulsory until between 1915 and 1933, depending on the state. So if you are researching an ancestor born before then in the US, you may have to look to the church that your family attended because this is where they would have often had baptismal records, which would also indicate a birth date and parents' names. Also, the public currently has access to the U.S. Census from 1940 and earlier. The census gets released to the public every 72 years, so we will be able to use the 1950 census in 2022. If you are looking for relations born outside of the U.S., you will need to inquire about your country of interest's specific laws regarding birth registries. Ancestors who immigrated to the U.S. should be documented on ship manifests or border crossing records. Here is a compiled list of records that you can use to research information about your ancestors. Interview your relatives now. My father-in-law passed away last year, and I always enjoyed when he recounted his childhood in Brazil. But I really should have written it down, or better yet, recorded it. I'm also glad I spent so much time as a child with my own grandmother, as she liked to tell me about her life in Chicago. What I would do to have some of her stories recorded. As the family historian, you take on the responsibility of recording histories. Remember, people like to talk about themselves, so don't be shy to ask. Some ideas include face-to-face interviews, telephone conversations, and written questionnaires. Be prepared with your questions that you want to ask, and make sure to take good notes. Researching today you can really have the best of both worlds with regards to traditional and digital research. And this type of research will most likely demand both. For vital records, such as marriage licenses, birth and death certificates, you can often order informational hard copies from the county recorder. Be aware that you need to know what county the event took place in. I like to have hard copies, but I also make sure and scan them so they are preserved. Several years ago, a stack of photos from my dad's time in the military were set aside as I intended to scan them, but they ended up getting wet and destroyed. It was an unfortunate accident, but had I scanned them, then I would at least have the images to look back on. If you don't have a scanner at home, local libraries often have one for you to use, and you can save your images on a USB stick. Scanning your documents also allows you to share them with other family members who might have interest in them. There are resources out there that are free and some are subscription-based. You can buy an Ancestry.com membership to use at home. They have 2 different levels of membership, US and World. You can also access Ancestry from the library for free. The library access is limited in that you can't save your information to it. Be sure to save any documents you find to a USB memory stick, or you can email them to yourself. Before buying any membership, ask yourself how much you are willing to invest for this hobby. Do you have a friend or other family member who might want to split the costs and share the use? You can get resources for free, but you will be more limited. Also, keep in mind if you want to order hard copy vital documents from county recorders' offices, they charge upward of $20 for each document. Consider asking relatives if they might already have records that you can copy and add to your research collection. Here is a list of websites that offer free information for genealogists. Now I will walk you through using Ancestry Library Edition. Remember that this site is not designed on an individual level. It's made so that many people can use it. That being the case, there are numerous personalized functionalities and options available to private subscribers that are not available in the Library Edition. You cannot create family trees, you cannot collaborate with other researchers, and you cannot access DNA information. You also must use Ancestry Library inside of the library. You need to access it from the Burbank Public Library website. What can you do on the Ancestry Library database? You can search up your ancestors, find information about them, and email it to yourself or save it to a USB. It's a great way to start research. Today we will get started by going to the Burbank Public Library main webpage. From the Burbank Public Library main webpage, you will need to find the toolbar at the top and choose the Research option. We offer access to many databases, but at the top of the list, you will find a link to Ancestry.com Library Edition. Once you've entered your library card number, the Ancestry page should look like what you see on the screen now. Across the top of the page, you will see a toolbar that has various options. We are going to learn how to search, so that is what you'd want to select. Next, you must decide which ancestor you want to research first. I typed in my grandfather's name and his dates of birth and death. It's okay if you don't have all the information, but you do want to plug in as much as you can to help narrow the search. Location often helps narrow the search as well. Go ahead and search your ancestor. These results are the most common that you will find using Ancestry.com. Keep in mind that some states are better at sharing their information with databases such as Ancestry, while others are not. When your results pop up, ideally the most relevant will be at the top of the list. If you look at the entries that I marked with the red arrows, I know these are my grandfather because it has the correct birth and death information and the locations match what I know. If I analyze the entries with the purple arrows, I see that those are not for my grandfather, as he never lived in South Dakota or Minnesota. Also notice that I got 501,409 results. The more information you can provide in the search, the fewer results you will get, which will lessen your workload and theoretically result in more accurate hits. When you see an entry that you feel is pertinent to your search, you can open it up by clicking on it. Once you click on the link, you will get more detailed information, and using the Ancestry Library version, you can send the document to yourself using the orange Send Document link. It will prompt you to email it to yourself. If you own a subscription to Ancestry.com, then you can save it to an Ancestors profile or save it to what they call a shoebox so you can later determine where it belongs in your documentation. Some documents you find will only be transcriptions of the original. This is a World War II draft card for my grandfather. It includes physical descriptions such as his weight, height, eye color, and complexion. It also indicates his employer. To my surprise, he worked as Studebaker. I was only ever told he was an LA police officer. This also lists his next of kin. Other documents that Ancestry.com has have been scanned as originals, such as this marriage license I found for my great-grandparents. Marriage licenses tell us when and where our ancestors were married. Often they provide the names of the bride and groom's parents as well. On my great-grandfather's death certificate, his mother's maiden name was marked as unknown. But when I found his marriage license some years later, that mystery was revealed. Once you start collecting documents and records, you will want to keep them organized. Ancestry Library has charts and forms available to help you do just that. On the home page, look for the Charts and Forms link right in the toolbar. You should familiarize yourself with the various forms they offer. You don't need to use all of them, but you should see which one meets your needs as a researcher. These are in PDF format, so you can fill them out on the computer using Adobe Acrobat, or you can print them out and write information in by hand. Here is an example of an ancestral chart that I downloaded from Ancestry.com. As you can see, this is just for one person, so you can end up with a lot of paperwork. If you are saving them on your computer or using a USB, make sure you are naming them in ways that will make finding them easier. For example, I would name this Schmidt_Kenneth A _ancestral chart. I first use the surname of the relative, his first name, and middle initial. This is important, especially if people pass along names generationally. You can also include junior or senior to help indicate person if applicable. I then describe the document itself. It might be a little extra work at the beginning, but you will really appreciate it when the time comes to hunt down the paperwork. This is another example of a form offered by Ancestry.com. It is a family group record, and it has a lot more information than the previous chart. I would name this one Schmidt_Kenneth A _family group record. Use naming conventions that make sense to you. If you are working from the library, you will need to save your work to a USB drive or upload it to the cloud. If you have a home computer, be sure to take the information from the USB and save it on your hard drive. You don't want your work to be in only one place, because if you lose your USB stick, or if your hard drive becomes compromised and you lose the information, it will most likely be impossible to recover. Also, be aware of when technologies become obsolete. Do you remember floppy disks? I wrote many a high school term paper and saved it to a floppy, but I'm not sure I could ever retrieve it. If and when the time comes that USB sticks are becoming obsolete, be sure to transfer your data to whatever is the most current storage method. For physical documents, they should be kept in dry, cool, and preferably dark conditions. Archivists recommend archival safe containers because acids in regular storage can deteriorate documents and photos. Also consider scanning your documents and photos for preservation's sake. When organizing in your hard drive or on your USB, keep it simple and easy to understand. Also, keep it consistent. I recommend a file folder named Genealogy or Family History with subfolders for each surname. Within the family surname folders, you can create folders for each person or by era. Do it in a way that makes sense to you. There are times when you come across challenges in your research. I have family that came from Norway as Johansson. Then when they arrived in the US, they changed it to Johnson. Names were often shortened, such as Rosenberg becoming Rosen or even Rose. Contrary to popular belief, the immigrants at Ellis Island were not forced to change their names, but it happened because of language barriers and the fact that illiteracy was far more common back then. When starting to search for relatives, start with the men first. Women often change their names upon marriage, so once you find the husband's documents, you might find it easier to trace the wife. Search geographically. Whatever your heritage is, it is likely they moved to a specific location in the US together. Germans first migrated to Pennsylvania in droves. Norwegians went to Wisconsin, Italians went to New York. Consult the census and the time that your ancestor lived. The census will often list the year of immigration and where they came from. It should also list members of all family living in the household. A census may inform you that they are living as boarders, or in a case I found in my history, some of my great aunts were in a tuberculosis hospital in the 1920 census. The United States is a melting pot, which means we all have varied ancestry. What happens when your country of origin is not largely represented in databases? First, know that Ancestry.com does have a paid subscription for world records, but those are mostly going to be European, as so much of the world has not been consistent about record keeping. If you are planning on visiting your country of heritage, plan to spend a day at their local library or repository. European churches have historically been excellent record keepers of their congregation. There are often local ethnic groups that work together to promote research in genealogy. The Immigrant Genealogical Society in Burbank houses a library focusing on German resources. There is also a Jewish Genealogy Society and a Nordic Genealogy Society in the Los Angeles area. The Southern California Genealogical Society has a library locally, and they have a multitude of resources. If you plan to work mostly online, there are message boards and forums where you can work collaboratively with others who are researching similarly.